In August 1964, the United States Congress gave President Lyndon Johnson the power to wage war in Vietnam. The reason? North Vietnamese torpedo boats had attacked American destroyers in the Gulf of Tonkin. Except one of those attacks never happened. The government knew it. The military knew it. They went to war anyway. This is the story of the Gulf of Tonkin incident, the lie that launched America's longest war and cost 58,000 American lives. Subscribe, because this story proves that governments lie, and lies have consequences. August 1964. Vietnam was a growing problem. The country had been divided since 1954. Communist North Vietnam versus the American-backed South. For years, the North had been supporting a guerrilla insurgency in the South, the Viet Cong. American advisors were already in Vietnam, thousands of them. They were training the South Vietnamese Army, flying missions, and occasionally engaging in combat. But America wasn't officially at war. Congress hadn't authorized it. The public wasn't ready for it. President Lyndon Johnson wanted to change that. Johnson had inherited Vietnam from Kennedy. He believed that if South Vietnam fell to communism, the rest of Southeast Asia would follow. The domino theory. But 1964 was an election year. Johnson was running against Barry Goldwater, who was painted as a dangerous warmonger. Johnson positioned himself as the moderate, the peacemaker. He couldn't start a war before the election. He needed a provocation. He got one, or so he claimed. The USS Maddox was a destroyer on a special mission. In early August 1964, the Maddox was conducting De Soto patrols in the Gulf of Tonkin, intelligence-gathering operations along the North Vietnamese coast. The missions were provocative by design. The Maddox would sail close to North Vietnamese waters, using electronic equipment to map radar installations and gather signals intelligence. At the same time, South Vietnamese commandos, trained and supported by the CIA, were conducting raids against North Vietnamese coastal installations. The North Vietnamese didn't distinguish between the destroyer and the raiders. To them, it was all American aggression. On August 2, 1964, North Vietnamese torpedo boats attacked the Maddox. The attack was real. 3 North Vietnamese P-4 torpedo boats approached the Maddox in international waters. They launched torpedoes and opened fire with machine guns. The Maddox returned fire and called for air support. F-8 Crusaders from the USS Ticonderoga arrived and strafed the torpedo boats. When the engagement ended, 1 American aircraft was damaged. 1 U.S. sailor had a minor wound from a machine gun round. 1 torpedo boat was sunk, and 2 were damaged. It was a minor skirmish. The North Vietnamese had attacked an American warship in international waters. Johnson's response was measured. He issued a warning to North Vietnam, but didn't escalate immediately. Then came August 4th. On the night of August 4th, 1964, the Maddox and another destroyer, the USS Turner Joy, reported they were under attack. Radar operators claimed to see incoming torpedo boats. Sonar operators reported torpedo sounds. The destroyers began evasive maneuvers and opened fire into the darkness. For hours, the 2 ships fired at radar contacts and reported dodging torpedoes. They claimed to have sunk 2 or more enemy boats. But something was wrong. There were no visual sightings of enemy vessels. The radar contacts were erratic and inconsistent. The sonar readings could have been the sounds of the ship's own propellers. Captain John Herrick of the Maddox sent a message expressing doubt. Review of action makes many reported contacts and torpedoes fired appear doubtful. Freak weather effects on radar and overeager sonar operators may have accounted for many reports. In other words, we're not sure anything actually happened. Herrick recommended a complete evaluation before any further action taken. That evaluation never happened. In Washington, the reports of a second attack were exactly what some officials wanted to hear. Secretary of Defense Robert McNamara pushed for immediate retaliation. President Johnson saw an opportunity. Within hours, before the facts could be verified, Johnson ordered airstrikes against North Vietnam. On the night of August 4th, American aircraft attacked North Vietnamese torpedo boat bases and oil storage facilities. It was the first direct American bombing of North Vietnam. Johnson went on television to announce the strikes. He told the American people that North Vietnamese forces had conducted hostile actions against American ships in international waters. He didn't mention the doubts. He didn't mention Captain Herrick's messages. He presented the attack as an established fact. The deception was underway. 3 days later, Johnson asked Congress for authorization to use military force in Vietnam. The Gulf of Tonkin resolution gave the president authority to take all necessary measures to repel any armed attack against the forces of the United States and to prevent further aggression. It was, in effect, a blank check for war. The House of Representatives passed it unanimously, 416 to 0. The Senate passed it 88 to 2. Only Wayne Morse of Oregon and Ernest Gruening of Alaska voted against. Senator Morse warned his colleagues, "I believe that history will record that we have made a great mistake. We are, in effect, giving the president war-making powers in the absence of a declaration of war." He was right. The Gulf of Tonkin resolution became the legal basis for the Vietnam War. Over the next decade, America would send over 2.7 million troops to Vietnam. Over 58,000 would never come home. Hundreds of thousands would be wounded. Millions of Vietnamese, soldiers and civilians, would perish, all based on an incident that almost certainly didn't happen. The truth began to emerge years later. In 1965, President Johnson privately admitted doubts. "For all I know, our Navy was shooting at whales out there," he said. In 1967, Secretary McNamara testified before Congress. Under questioning, he acknowledged that the evidence for the second attack was less than definitive. But by then, over 400,000 American troops were in Vietnam. The war had taken on a life of its own. In 1995, former Secretary McNamara met with his North Vietnamese counterpart in Hanoi. He asked directly, "Did you attack us on August 4th?" The Vietnamese answer was unequivocal. Absolutely not. There was no second attack. In 2005, the National Security Agency declassified documents from its own investigation of the incident. The documents revealed that NSA analysts had known within days that the second attack probably hadn't occurred. Signals intelligence used to justify the attack had been misinterpreted or possibly even falsified. But this information had been suppressed. It never reached the public or Congress before the Gulf of Tonkin resolution was passed. The government had lied. The evidence was now irrefutable. Why did it happen? Some historians believe it was an honest mistake in the fog of war. Nervous sailors, bad weather, faulty equipment, all could have contributed to false reports. But the decision to act before verifying, the decision to suppress doubts, the decision to rush to war, those were choices made by men who wanted a war and found an excuse for one. President Johnson needed a reason to escalate. The Gulf of Tonkin gave him one. Secretary McNamara needed to demonstrate American resolve. He pushed for immediate action. Military leaders wanted to take the fight to North Vietnam. They had been waiting for authorization. The system failed because too many people wanted it to fail. Captain Herrick, the man who commanded the Maddox, lived with the consequences. He had tried to raise doubts. His messages warning of uncertainty were ignored or buried. The decision to bomb North Vietnam was made before his warnings reached the right people. Herrick later said he believed the second attack never occurred. He had done his duty, reported what he observed, and been overruled by men thousands of miles away who wanted a different answer. He spent the rest of his career knowing that a war had been launched on false pretenses, and that his doubts had been silenced. The Vietnam War became a national trauma. It divided the country. It destroyed trust in government. It spawned the anti-war movement, the counterculture, the credibility gap. When the Pentagon Papers were leaked in 1971, revealing the systematic deception behind the war, millions of Americans lost faith in their leaders. And it all traced back to August 4th, 1964, a night when American sailors shot at shadows, and their government decided those shadows were real enough to start a war. What are the lessons of the Gulf of Tonkin? First, governments lie, especially when they want war. The Gulf of Tonkin was not an isolated case. It follows a pattern seen throughout history. The sinking of the Maine, the Zimmerman telegram, weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. When leaders want a war, they find reasons for one, and those reasons don't have to be true. Second, Congress has a duty to verify. The Gulf of Tonkin resolution passed in days with almost no opposition. Senators and representatives trusted the administration's account without demanding proof. That failure haunted many of them. Wayne Morse, who voted no, was vindicated by history. The 88 who voted yes enabled a decade of disaster. Third, doubt is patriotic. Captain Herrick's warnings should have been heeded. Skepticism should have slowed the rush to war. Instead, doubt was suppressed, ignored, classified. The men who questioned were overruled by the men who wanted action. Fourth, truth matters. Eventually, the truth about Tonkin emerged, but it took decades, and by then, 58,000 Americans and millions of Vietnamese had paid the price. If the truth had been known in August 1964, would Congress have authorized war? Would the American people have supported it? We'll never know, but the lie made sure we didn't get to choose. The men who served in Vietnam deserved better. They were told they were fighting to stop communist aggression. They were told their country had been attacked. They were told the cause was just. Many of them believed it. They served with honor and courage. But they were sent to fight based on a lie their own government told. That betrayal, more than the protests, more than the treatment they received coming home, was the deepest wound of Vietnam. The Gulf of Tonkin Resolution was repealed in 1971. By then, it was meaningless. Nixon claimed he didn't need it anyway. He had authority as commander-in-chief. But the repeal was symbolic. It was Congress admitting finally that it had been deceived. Too late to save the 58,000. Too late to undo the trauma. But at least an acknowledgement of the truth. August 4th, 1964. On a dark night in the Gulf of Tonkin, American destroyers fired at radar ghosts. Within days, American bombs fell on North Vietnam. Within months, the first combat troops arrived. Within years, Vietnam became America's longest war, all because of an attack that never happened. This is the story of the Gulf of Tonkin, a story of lies, a story of consequences, a story America should never forget. Because if we forget, it will happen again. Maybe it already has. Subscribe for more military history that matters. Share this video so the truth is never buried again. Comment. Do you trust the government to tell the truth about war? This video is for the 58,000 Americans who lost their lives in Vietnam, and for the millions of Vietnamese who perished in a war built on lies. They deserve the truth. We all do.